Thank you for tuning in today and welcome back to another episode of The Source. I'm your host, Zain Raza. And today I'll be talking to Israeli politician and member of the Israeli parliament, Dr. Ofer Cassif. Dr. Ofer is also a lecturer of politics and philosophy at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and received his PhD in the London School of Economics and postdoctorate at the Columbia University. Dr. Ofer, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Before diving into the most recent developments, I would like to begin with your situation. In October, an Israeli Parliament Ethics Committee suspended you for 45 days after you criticized Israel's assault on Gaza. This came at a time when the Israeli government arrested more than 100 Israeli citizens over social media posts that were supporting Palestinians in Gaza, and it is reported that at least 70 Israeli university students face suspension or some form of disciplinary action for posting pro-Palestinian content online. Can you provide some details about your situation and then talk about the wider crackdown that is happening in Israel?
Yeah, I'm at the moment in South America. Actually, a couple of days before the massacre committed by Hamas, I arrived in Mexico City to participate in a seminar of socialist, communist, and workers' parties. So, and when the massacre took place, I was there, and then I couldn't get back. Primarily because there were no flights to Israel and some other stuff. So I moved to South America where my wife's family lives and I'm still here. I intend to go back to Israel hopefully soon. But once I was suspended, so I couldn't participate in Knesset activities anyway. So I've been here. Although, of course, I would prefer to be back home, but that's the situation. And it has to do with your question, the political important question, regarding the persecution of opposition voices in Israel.
And how is the crackdown? Are civil liberties in danger at the moment? And are dissidents and activists that are standing up against facing some sort of crackdown from the government?
Absolutely. Look, allow me to put it in the right context. I guess that your followers and those who are watching us know that just before the massacre of 7th of October and the aftermath, the government of Israel, which I must say is a fascist government, and they tried to pursue a coup d'etat. Of course, it was sugar-coated under the term judicial reform, but that was not a judicial reform. That was a coup of the government with the intention of eliminating the very few democratic components that still exist there. And there aren't too many. They want to eliminate it altogether. Now, they failed primarily because of the protest. So they just used the terrible, monstrous carnage that Hamas committed as an excuse to pursue with the very same ends they had when they tried to carry out the coup. So on top of the massacre that Israel is responsible for in Gaza, and there's no other way to describe it, I mean, we must be very cautious, and so allow me to add some words. There's no dichotomy in the sense that if you oppose the terrible Hamas carnage, and we must, of course, oppose, then you, by definition, support the massacre that Israel carries out against the Palestinian innocent civilians in Gaza, and I emphasize innocent civilians, and the other way around. If you oppose the massacre that Israel is responsible for, that the assault that Israel carries out against Gaza, it doesn't mean that you support the Hamas or its own carnage. In that sense, I think that too many governments in the world, including the German one, is guilty in bloodshed because they allow it under the excuse of self-defense of Israel. This is not self-defense. And part of what is the government of Israel has been doing since the 7th of October, on top of the massacre and the war crimes in Gaza themselves, is of course using it as a smokescreen to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians in the West Bank, to wage a war against democratic Jews and leftists and the Palestinian citizens within Israel. And if we have the time, I can detail it. And part of it, of course, it's turning Israel into a full-fledged fascist dictatorship by partly what you quoted before, persecuting people who raise an opposition voice, for calling for ceasefire, for exchange of prisoners and release of hostages, for stopping the war, and eventually for ending the occupation and reach a just peace, which is the interest of all involved, of everybody involved. It is primarily a Palestinian interest, but it is also an Israeli interest. Security for Israel, and I and my companions, Palestinians and Jews alike, we support security of Israel. We are presented as if we were anti-Israeli. The only factor that now behaves against or executes policy against Israel and the Israelis is the government. So I call upon the German government and the German society, if you really want to support Israel, you must be against the war and against the government, because the government, the fascist government of Netanyahu, Ben Gvir, and the other thugs, they are the one who pose the Israeli society under a terrible risk.
You talked about this government trying to usurp the independence of the judiciary and putting the executive in the power, but I would like to further contextualize this conflict, which the mainstream media in Germany is failing to undertake. Can you tell us about the makeup of this government, what kind of figures they are? And secondly, can you provide an overview of how this government, once it came into power in 2022, handled the situation in Gaza and the West Bank?
Everybody knows that Netanyahu is charged in three really serious criminal charges. The only thing that drives Netanyahu is his own personal interest to stay out of prison. That's the only, not the main, the only thing that drives him. I must say that Netanyahu as a person is a psychopath. Even Yitzhak Shamir, who was prime minister of the Likud, and he was much more to the right than, ideologically speaking, than Netanyahu, he said 35 years ago that Netanyahu is dangerous to Israel, that Netanyahu thinks only about his own interests. It was many years before the criminal charges. But now, when you add the criminal charges to this psychopathic character of Netanyahu, it's even more dangerous. So why is it so important to talk about the personal issues of Netanyahu? Because when he composed the current government and coalition, he added the most fanatic, messianic, racist figures in Israeli politics. People who some of them were convicted in supporting Jewish terrorism, like Ben Gvir, like Smotrich, who was not charged for strange reasons, but he was supposed to be charged, and he was caught by the Shin Bet, the Secret Services, during the disengagement plan about 20 years ago. He was caught with a huge amount of fuel on his way to commit a terrorist attack. So those are the people who control the government. Why did Netanyahu form a government with those bigots? And why, even more importantly, Netanyahu turned the Likud party, which was a very, acclaimed, of course, this is not my cup of tea to say the least, well, never was, but the Likud party was an ideological throughout the years. Again, I opposed the Likud party, its ideology in politics, all the time. But still it was an ideological party. and it was a paramount party in the Israeli politics, even when it was in the opposition before the first time they won the elections in 1977. Netanyahu turned the Likud into a Bibist, you know, the term Bibism or Bibist, which is following the nickname of Netanyahu. He turned the Likud into a Bibist cult. Ex-people of the Likud say so. Many ex-ministers and members of the Knesset that were throughout the years in the Likud say so. There's no Likud but the title. Why is it so important? Because within the Likud, Netanyahu kicked out the more serious, profound, ideological figures, and he endorsed and paved the way into major positions within the Likud, people who are not different from Ben Gvir and Smotrich. So it's wrong to look only at the so-called the Zionist, the religious Zionism party as fascists and even worse. It's true they are, but within the Likud there is a majority now at the Knesset that ideologically speaking, if they have an ideology, because some of them are simply opportunists, but if we refer to the ideological ones, they are much closer to the racist, and I'm talking about a real belief in racial theory that Germany knows from its history quite well. I'm talking about people who really believe in Jewish supremacy. So within the Likud are many like that. Now, the reason that Netanyahu did that in order to hold the power in his hands. He didn't want people like Benny Begin, for instance, or Michael Eitan, or Dan Meridor, again, people with whom I have huge debates, disagreements, but I cannot ignore the fact that they were honest and serious people that, by the way, you can actually disagree and debate with them. Something you cannot say about the vast majority of the Likud people today. So why did he kick them out and pave the way to the scum of the earth? Because that's the way he could keep the power in his hands. He turned the Likud into a personal Bibist cult. Now he formed this government too with those bigots because the only thing he's interested in is to be a prime minister and distance himself for the danger for him of being imprisoned. So in that sense, he's ready to do whatever, he feels that he can get something. He is the beneficial, not the Israeli society. He is the main enemy of Israel now. He and his government. Everything. Look at the terrible massacre that Hamas committed. Who's responsible for that? Not who is the guilty. The guilt is wholly on Hamas. They are the murderers who did it. But the responsibility in negligence and in creating the circumstances that enabled this terrible carnage to occur is Netanyahu and his government. I'll give you a few examples. First of all, the intelligence within the Israeli army warned Netanyahu already in March. We are talking about 9 months ago, that if the government continued with the coup, with the so-called judicial reform, Hamas, like others, Hezbollah, Iran, and others, but Hamas, in our case, is going to use it against Israel. The intelligence within the Israeli army warned Netanyahu that the continuation in this coup, putting Israel on a serious risk and danger. He didn't want to listen. On the eve, I remember that I was there, on the eve of the vote, on the so-called reasonableness clause, which is a massive change in the judicial system by law, which, lower the independence and the possibility of the court to rule against decisions taken by the government, on the eve of the vote on this law, the chief of staff of the Israeli army with some other generals came urgently to the Knesset, something that doesn't happen very often, if ever, to talk personally to Netanyahu, to tell him, stop, it's going to put Israel at risk. He refused to see them. He refused to meet them. Now, I don't remember exactly how much time before the massacre itself, I think there were 34 or 35 battalions of the Israeli army on the frontier between Gaza Strip and Israel. Netanyahu, of course, is the head of the snake, but the government as a whole. But Netanyahu moved 32 battalions from there to the West Bank. He left only 2 or 3 battalions at the frontier with Gaza. Why did he do that? In order to defend the illegal settlements and the pogroms of the settlers, the pogroms they commit on a daily basis against innocent Palestinians, especially shepherds. This is part of the ethnic cleansing that goes on in the West Bank. So even Hamas terrorists that were caught during and after the massacre and now are interrogated, it was published, some of them said they were in shock. They were surprised that when they cut the fence and invaded Israel, no one was there to wait for them. By the way, in the kibbutzim at the frontier with Gaza Strip, in each and every kibbutz, there is a security, local security that's supposed to be armed. They took the government, again, Netanyahu as the head of the government, as the prime minister. They took most of the arms from those groups that were supposed to secure the kibbutzim in order to what? To give them to settlers in the West Bank. Now, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Not only to prove that the government of Israel, Netanyahu personally, are responsible for the massacre and should have gone home, if not to prison 5 weeks ago, it is also to explain and to prove that the incentive of Netanyahu personally and of his government, their motivation has nothing to do with the well-being or security of the Israelis or the state of Israel. Only the security and well-being of themselves and their close ones, that is the 5% of the population which are the settlers. This is something the world has to know, because once they, and especially the government of Germany, because you are talking to me from Germany, must understand, as long as you support the government of Israel, you harm the Israelis. You act against the interest of the state of Israel. If you are really a friend of the Israelis in the state of Israel, you must act against the Israeli government that puts all of us at risk. That's the right thing.
Can you also talk about the policies of the Netanyahu administration once it came to power again in 2022 towards the Gaza and also the West Bank?
First of all, it's not only this government. Netanyahu throughout the years, and as you know, unfortunately, Netanyahu is a prime minister. In the last 28 years, Netanyahu has been prime minister most of the time. There were just, here and there some changes, Sharon, Olmert, Barak, but for a short time relatively. Most of those years, Netanyahu was a prime minister or a minister of finance, under Sharon. And why do I say that? Because since Netanyahu was prime minister, since 2007, I think, but maybe I don't remember the exact year, he adopted a policy of strengthening Hamas in Gaza and weakening the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. And why? He said so explicitly. It's not interpretation of mine. In 2019, in a convention of the Likud party, he said so explicitly, and I quote more or less. He said, those who oppose the establishment of a Palestinian state must endorse and strengthen Hamas and weaken the Palestinian Authority. What is the rationale? Very simple. First of all, divide and rule. If you divide the Palestinians and you have one, the West Bank, in the West Bank, it's under occupation, of course, but at least in part, you have the Palestinian Authority, and in Gaza, the Hamas. And let us not forget that the Hamas, actually Hamas made a coup against the Palestinian Authority to control by a kind of a coup. In Gaza, Israel wanted that for the very same reason that Netanyahu said. Why? Because once there are two different, even conflicting authorities in the West Bank and in Gaza, you can say to the world, there's no one to talk to about Palestinian state. Let us assume that we talk to the Palestinian Authority. The Hamas in Gaza will never accept that, and vice versa. So they wanted this divide and rules thing. Secondly, which leads us to what actually Netanyahu has been doing, not just saying. Hamas is well known as a fanatic organization. So once you strengthen it, you can say that there's no one to talk to. There's no look at the Hamas, look at what's going on. They are fanatics, there's no one to speak to, no one to talk to. And so Netanyahu, as a prime minister, continuously, for many years, actually transferred huge amount of money, dollars, from Qatar to Hamas. Everybody knows it. Nobody denies it. Netanyahu doesn't deny it. This was the policy. They wanted strong Hamas. Now we are paying for that. By the way, 30 years ago and more, when Rabin was prime minister or minister of defense under Shamir, I don't remember, Dan Kretzer, that later on was the ambassador of the United States to Egypt and afterwards into Israel, warned Israel 30 years ago and more. He said, because Israel supported Hamas even then, they thought like any colonialist power, that if they strengthen the alternative to the national organization, which is the PLO, then they can continue and manage the occupation. This is a key term, managing the occupation instead of solving it or ending it, which led most of the Israelis and the world astray, as we saw it recently. 30 years ago, already Dan Kretzer warned the Israeli government that they were doing a terrible mistake, that everybody is going to pay a huge price for that. Unfortunately, he was right. Though I must say that the United States bear a lot of responsibility for that, although he said so as an American prego, for an official. Anyway, so that's the policy of this government and all governments of Netanyahu, strengthening Hamas in Gaza, weakening the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, managing the occupation, and worsening the occupation. If I may add another sentence, in the last, under this government, though it began in the government before, but under this government, there is an ongoing, before the massacre, now it's worse, an ongoing ethnic cleansing of Palestinians in the West Bank. When who carries out practically this ethnic cleansing? The settlers. They are allowed to do what they like. They are armed. They live in illegal settlements according to the international law, and many of them, the worst of them, live in so-called illegal outposts, which are illegal even according to the Israeli law, but this government ordered the military not to touch those outposts. So actually the government of Israel violates the law on a daily basis. I personally visited 2 communities of shepherds in the West Bank and the Jordan Valley just a week before the massacre. And I saw there good people, hardworking people, never harmed anyone, are interested in normal lives with no occupation, with no persecution, with no harassment by the settlers or the occupation forces, under whose auspices the settlers act and carry out their crimes. And I saw communities, 4 communities by then were expelled from their lands because of those pogroms and harassment of the settlers, vicious, racist settlers, armed ones under the auspices of the occupation forces. And now it's already, if I remember correctly, 14 or 16 communities who were expelled. We are talking about an area double than Tel Aviv that was ethnically cleansed. Where is the word? Where is Germany? Germany bears guilt, and justly so, for what they did 90 years ago to the Jews, including my family. But they are going to regret 90 years from now that they did the same, or allowed, not the same, but allowed crimes against humanity against the Palestinians. That is going to be too late. You have the responsibility to stop it now. You can.
Let's look at some recent developments surrounding this conflict. On October 7th, on the day Hamas and the Islamic Jihad carried out a surprise attack on Israel, they took around 239 hostages that included military personnel, civilians, and foreign nationals. After initially rejecting the ceasefire for hostage deal, the Israeli government yesterday agreed to deal with Hamas. Hamas agreed to release 50 women and children for a 4-day truce and also announced that Israel will be releasing 150 Palestinian women and children from Israeli jails that some call not prisoners but hostages as well, and also allow hundreds of trucks carrying humanitarian, medical, fuel aid and a lot of other goods that will be allowed into Gaza. Hezbollah also announced that it will be joining the ceasefire, which took effect earlier today. This is a 2-part question. Firstly, what is the significance of this development? And secondly, why did it take for Israel so long to come to an agreement with Hamas?
I begin with the second question. First of all, it's quite natural that when there are negotiations, doesn't matter right now between whom, it takes time, normally. But there's another issue which I would like to raise, is that, and it goes back to what I said in the very beginning of our chat, that Netanyahu is interested in his own well-being and good, and that's it. Netanyahu opposed this kind of deal. I don't like the term deal, but I use it because I cannot find at the moment a better one. The reason I don't like the term deal is because I think people, human beings, should not be referred to or regarded as commodities, and we talk about deals. It seems we refer to them as commodities, which I really, I have a grudge against it, but I use it for the sake of our conversation. But it was important for me to raise the reservations. Anyway, so Netanyahu was not interested and opposed this deal because he doesn't care about the well-being and lives of the hostages. He doesn't care. And as long as he thought that the public in Israel doesn't support such a deal, as it were, so he didn't want to execute it. Once he began to understand, following the polls, following the demonstrations, the meeting, which were very not only hurtful but disgusting meetings with the families of the hostages, and I'm saying disgusting because of the attitude of Netanyahu and some other ministers who behaved in such a humiliating, inhumane way to the poor families of the hostages. They go through hell, and on top of that hell, Netanyahu and his thugs added more. So more fire to the infierno. And so in that sense, once Netanyahu thought or began to understand that the majority in Israel supports such a deal, he changed his mind. Again, because he's only interested in his own good. So, but it took time. This is part of the prolonged time that it took to reach this deal. There are many things behind the scene that we don't know. So I guess this is part of the, the time that it took. As I said before, negotiations, there are many of them everywhere are implicit or are, we don't know behind what's going on exactly behind the scene. I'm sure that Hamas has a lot of responsibility for the ongoing time without releasing the hostages. But as I said, as far as Israel is concerned, the government of Israel is concerned, the time it took is mainly because of the interests of those who are involved, primarily Netanyahu, but not only. The whole gang entitled the government of Israel as its own narrow interest, which is, again, not the security and not the well-being of the Israelis in general and of the hostages in particular. That's the reason why it took so much time, in my view.
On November 19, Finance Minister of Israel, Bezalel Smotrich, stated, and I quote him here, quote, "I welcome the initiative of the voluntary immigration of Gaza Arabs to countries around the world. This is the right humanitarian solution for the residents of Gaza and the entire region after 75 years of refugees, poverty, and danger. The state of Israel will no longer be able to accept the existence of an independent entity in Gaza." Unquote. Given this statement, what do you think Israel's plans are in Gaza? Where will 2.2 million Palestinian civilians go to?
Look, we began our conversation, talking about my suspension. And by the way, in the meantime, another member of my party, the Communist Party, a member of the Knesset, Aida Tuma Sliman, my friend, was also suspended for 2 months. For, like myself, for talking about, for calling to ceasefire, for accusing the government of Israel in war crimes and in massacre, only for that, to show that the persecution is mainly of, so to speak, common people, but of members of the Knesset as well. This is part of the dictatorial process that Israel is going through. But I mention it because it's totally legitimate in Israel to call for elimination of the Palestinians. Ministers and members of the Knesset and rabbis, and of course, again, quote unquote, common people, call for elimination of the Palestinian in Gaza. The vice speaker of the Knesset, actually a couple of days ago, tweeted calling to burn down Gaza. This is a Nazi vocabulary. They can do what they just go on. In the public discourse in Israel, this is legitimate. So what you refer to, there is an of the intelligence office. They published, it's unclassified, we can speak about it freely. They published a document that was published around the world a few weeks ago, a detailed plan of how to expel, to transfer, to ethnically cleanse the Gaza Strip from its indigenous Palestinian people. And it goes on. The world doesn't say anything. A minister just a couple of weeks ago called to drop an atomic bomb on Gaza. You can hear this language from ministers and members of the Knesset and social figures and celebs, as it were, all the time. So I'm really afraid that something like that, if the international community doesn't intervene and stop this madness, it may come true. It may. Look what's going on. There is an ongoing massacre in Gaza. According to the information I have, and I want to be very cautious here because maybe this is not accurate, but I guess this is the general picture is more or less like that. There are about 14,000 dead in Gaza Strip at the moment. The vast majority, more than 70%, are innocent civilians. More than 5,000 are children. The people who are still alive are running out of water, if there is any, food, medicine. According to what was published a couple of days ago, no hospital is functioning at the moment. All the hospitals in Gaza Strip either were bombarded totally or just out of order, cannot supply any treatment. Already a few weeks ago, we heard and read about surgeries that were going on under the light of mobile phones. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. So if Israel can do such crimes, why it cannot continue and with the ethnic cleansing plan? So I urge the international community, and again, especially the government of Germany, do something to stop it. And I have to emphasize, this is first and foremost a humanistic crime. I'm regarding myself as a humanistic, in the sense of seeing the life and well-being of all human beings as the prior value. I don't care about the origins of a person, one's gender or sex or political beliefs or religion or whatever, or nationality. For me, human beings are the prior value, the supreme value. So my cry is out of humanistic, first of all, and first and foremost, humanistic stance. But it is also an Israeli cry and a Jewish one, because in my view, this is also the interest of Israelis and Israel. Of course, it goes without saying that it is the interest of the Palestinians. And as I said, to start with, that it is an interest of everyone who considers oneself as a humanistic, but it is also the interest of Israel. Everyone who wants to save Israel from the government of Israel must do everything, not only to prevent this terrible crime against humanity of transfer, but also to reach a real ceasefire, not a pause, a ceasefire totally, a withdrawal of all Israeli forces from the Gaza Strip, and for the sake of both peoples, to begin a real process towards ending the occupation and reaching a just peace. This is the interest of everybody who is involved, Palestinians and Israelis alike, Arabs and Jews, everybody. Do something.
What do you think the long-term implications on Israel will be if it continues this war? Because it said this war could take years, according to Benjamin Netanyahu. What will be the ramifications on it domestically, internationally, and will the state of Israel be able to overcome all of the hardships that will come with it?
Look, we all remember what happened in 1982 when Israel invaded Lebanon and stayed there almost 20 years. The death toll was horrific, of Lebanese, of course, but also of Israeli soldiers who were killed there almost on a daily basis throughout the 20 years. And eventually, Israel had to, withdraw from Lebanon. Doesn't matter at the moment if it was too late, too little. I do not refer to that. But I'm afraid that a similar scenario, we may step into such a terrible similar scenario in Gaza. Because, there is this cliche that you know how you get into a war, you never know how you get out of it. Perhaps it is a cliche, but that doesn't turn it into a false statement. So even when I'm looking from the eyes of the Israeli army and government, and obviously I am an Israeli, and I am interested in the well-being of my compatriots and my state and my country, on top of the crimes that it involves crimes against war crimes against humanity vis-a-vis the Palestinians in Gaza, it is also terribly dangerous for Israel and the Israelis. Now, also economically, we already begin to see the cracks and begin to see the crisis, the economic crisis that is stepping towards us. And especially if we refer to the economic opinion of this government, which is extremely rightist as well. This government is not only, like I said before, a fascist government, a rightist government vis-a-vis the Palestinians or the civil rights, etc., or in its anti-democratic activities. It is also extremely rightist as far as the social and economic questions are concerned. So, and you can see that as far as specifically Smotrich, as the finance minister is concerned, he doesn't understand anything about economy. Even the professionals within the ministry say so. And but I put it aside for a while. Of course, the investment, economically speaking, investment in this war, in arms, etc., that's going to come at the expense of something. It's already there. Who is the first one who's going to pay the price? The weakest classes, women, Arab citizens, the so-called periphery, Oriental Jews, workers, the working class. They are the small businesses. They are the ones who are going to pay the main price. That's not going to harm the settlers. That's not going to harm the ultra-millionaire Netanyahu and his family, or some of his ministers who are immensely rich. It's going to cause a huge damage to the most needy ones, and including as far as I remember, 250,000 refugees within Israel, because let us not forget that besides the terrible question of refugees in Gaza and in the West Bank, given the massacre of Hamas and following it, about 200,000 Israelis are now refugees because they cannot get back to their houses and hometowns or villages in the south of Israel. And there are also thousands and thousands of refugees in the north that were expelled from there. They had to flee their houses because of the confrontation with Hezbollah. Who's going to pay for that? At the moment, by the way, the state disappeared. The state still, the budget and the behavior of the government is for the benefit of the settlers and the ultra-Orthodox. But those who need the support of the state, especially those refugees I refer to, they get nothing or almost nothing. And as long as the war goes on top of what I said before, they are not going to get any support from the state. That's going to lead to a total collapse of the Israeli society. And I do not want that to happen. I'm accused very often by the rightists in Israel as being anti-Israeli. I'm not anti-Israeli. I think that our opinion, what we've been saying for ages, has been proved right. That's one thing. And secondly, everything we oppose to or support is for the beneficiary of Israelis. And that's part of the situation. The government is an enemy of the Israeli state and people because it does everything to harm them. In order, they sacrifice the vast majority of Israelis on the altar of fanaticism, messianism, and bigotry.
To my last question, according to our observation, Western media outlets, especially in Germany, when they invite experts to speak on Gaza and Israel, it mostly includes voices that support Israel's assault on Gaza, whether they are analysts, politicians, or from the Israeli army. Critics or dissidents from Israel or even voices from Palestine are rarely, if at all, given a platform. How has your experience been? Firstly, in terms of the media in Israel, and secondly, has any leading media institution from Germany, US, UK invited you thus far to provide your perspective?
As to the second question, no one from the so-called conventional mainstream media invited me. In Europe, I mean, in the United States, I was interviewed by CNN and Al Jazeera, BBC, Russia Today, and some podcasts, etc., etc. I was not by other mainstream media. In Germany, you are the first one that actually interviews me. As to the first question, I said that before, referred to it before. I think that this is, first of all, it's anti-democratic, because a real democratic society, I wouldn't like to say even state is a specific apparatus. Society is something wider. It includes the state as an apparatus, as institutions, but it also includes public and etc. and civil society organizations, etc. A democratic society is not only a society in which the state or in which there are elections and of course basic liberties, etc. It must be pluralistic. And pluralism means that debates should come to the fore. Now, of course, in my view, this is a huge question. In my view, of course, there are margins or there are limits. For instance, I think that racists or chauvinists should not get the chance to express their malicious, sick views. But apart from that, I think that everybody is entitled to not only to express oneself, but to be exposed to alternatives. Otherwise, how can we really seriously and rationally form our own views? We are supposed as rational creatures to form our views upon knowledge or upon information. And if some of the information is blocked, especially if it is blocked by the market apparatus or the state apparatus, so then we reach what perhaps something that a German scholar published and entitled The Spiral of Silence, Elizabeth Noel Neumann. I think it was in the early 70s that she published this text in which she explained in length how the media not only reflects public opinion, but more so forms public opinion. So it is anti-democratic, what you said before, and I'm aware of that. I lamented that even among the leftists, and Die Linke, for instance, they even voted, for instance, to outlaw BDS. It doesn't matter what I think about the BDS. I may agree with them, I may oppose them, but they have the right to express themselves. Now it's illegal. And Die Linke even supported this. That's a shame, not a shame. That's something that, not only anti-democratic, sorry, this is outrageous. So voices like myself, and there are thousands like that in Israel as well, thousands of Jews as well, not only Arab citizens. Those voices should be heard. They must be heard. We began with the persecution of people like me in Israel, and we are ending with persecution of people like me in Germany. And I want to say that again. The German society, and especially German governments, bear a lot of guilt for the carnage, the criminal, monstrous carnage they did during the Holocaust. And justly they have the guilt feelings. They must pay for it. But it cannot be at the expense of other people's. You do not support and you do not express your guilt and you do not pay for those crimes by allowing your victims to victimize others. You are going to regret that as well in the future. You have the chance to stop and change it now. And I emphasize for the benefit of Israelis as well, because it's not a zero-sum game that if the Israel wins, the Palestinians lose, and otherwise, and vice versa. No, it's either a win-win or lose-lose situation. Either both Palestinians and Israelis win or both lose. And this is what I expect the German government, doesn't matter who is in the government, to understand and act upon it.
Dr. Ofer Cassif, Israeli politician and member of the Knesset, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. All the best.
And thank you for tuning in today. Please don't forget to join our alternative channels on Rumble, Telegram, and a podcast called Podbean. YouTube, which is owned by Google, can shadow ban and censor us at any time. Even though we cannot prove this, our reach has been down significantly since the start of the year, and therefore we are asking our viewers to join these alternative platforms. The links to these platforms are in the description of this video below. And if you're watching our videos regularly, make sure to donate today. We're an independent, non-profit, small media organization that does not accept any money from corporations or governments. Hence, we only depend on you to continue with our independent journalism and provide you with an alternative perspective. I'm your host, Zain Raza. See you next time.